So we'll be going live in about 5 minutes, just to give folks an opportunity to jump on board and see what we're going to talk about tonight. If you live in a poor community, if you feel that you are not represented and you feel that thing that goes on in your community, you don't have a say in it, you're going to love this presentation. So let's get started. This video is dedicated to those individuals that live in poor communities throughout the United States. It's dedicated to the ordinary individual that's doing extraordinary things to save his community. What we know. Programs come into poor communities time after time after time. And the end result is that the community remains the same. This video is going to talk about what empowerment looks like. It's going to talk about a community that's economically considered to be poor. How they got together to put together a plan to flip the switch and create its own table and invited others to that table. We want to talk about two types of models: need assessment and math and assets. This video is dedicated to those individuals that feel powerless to do anything in that neighborhood. It's committed to those individuals that feel like that voice does not make a difference. This video is going to change the narrative. Please listen to it until it ends. Here's what we know. Most of the entities that come into poor communities with the intent, as they say, to transform the community, get that elite training from the elite. And the elite then choose the ones that it works with to change the narrative. This video switches the switch because it gives the elite skill sets necessary to transform your community in the hands of the very people that live in the neighborhood. In fact, it empowers the community by creating a roadmap to success. So individuals that live in poor communities throughout the United States can flip the switch and begin to not only create the table, but set at the head of the table and make sure that your vision, your mission is part of you and not someone else. This initiative marries both critical and creative thinking into one approach to change the narrative related to community transformation. This is a truly bottom-up, from the street up approach to transforming poor communities from within. if you know someone that lives in a poor community, or if you live in a poor community, you want to listen to this through its entirety. They say, he who controls the gold control. This video is about putting the gold, as they say it, in the hands of the very people in poor communities so that they can create their own vision and their own mission. So sit back. Hope you listen to this presentation from the beginning to the end, because this is going to change the narrative when it comes to empowering people in underrepresented communities, in poor communities, in drug-infested communities, in crime communities, how to create their own table and be at the head of that table and changing its community. That being said, let's get started. This is a little background. The Sandtown Winchester community is a community located in West Baltimore. It is a community that's small, although small in size compared to other communities. It's very high when it comes to negative indicators, from crime, vacant houses, health issues, mental health, joblessness. As a matter of fact, Sandtown is the basis for the whole framework relevant to how do you transform the community. What took place in Sandtown that we're going to be talking about, and what resulted in the West Tampa community, is all about a seed that was planted in Sandtown. The presentation you're looking at is a presentation that was done back then. The other thing is that it talks about how do you begin to use lessons learned from the Sandtown experience, and how do you use that? This says this is the mother of innovation, the mother of new ideas back then, and how do you then apply that to the future now? And the list goes on. The workshop was designed to provide residents with an approach to empower them to change the narrative in their neighborhood. So it was entitled The Sandtown Community, Building Ownership and Empowerment. It talked about the only key success to moving a community forward and empowering that community if it has ownership in the process and they are empowered to exercise that ownership. So Roosevelt Boone III, an attorney, was the lead consultant on this. He is the person that brought me in. Roosevelt had a lot of background when it comes to community development, economic development, workforce development, and all those things needed to move a community forward. The group that we prepared this for was the Sandtown Residential Action Committee, CDC. It was funded back then by the Enterprise Community Partners. So the next section is going to talk about a little bit about me, related to my role, my thoughts. And then it's going to go into best practices from around the country. And then it's going to move into solution-oriented programs that can change the narrative. The program that I'm going to talk about is called Community Building and Partnership. Community Building and Partnership was a public and private initiative, and it launched the transformation of the Sandtown community. What it did was to bring a new school, next generation approach to transforming communities. A little bit about my background. So I'm looking at it from both perspectives. From one perspective, I have grown up in some of the most crime-ridden, drug-infested, distressed communities. I continue to live in a community like that. So from one perspective, I'm coming from a bird eye, up in your face, understanding of life, living in a poor community. So it's like a bottom-up approach to understanding. Mark that with the fact that I was able to get the training necessary to create the change that is necessary to what I think is easing the pain. This is a little bit of background. So my first introduction to community building, and that's what I did, started in the early 1980s when I was hired as a community organizer for an organization called the Sandtown Winchester Improvement Association. From there, because I was so curious about change, from there I advanced to training and being a community strategist, a program developer, designing community comprehensive solutions to urban and distressed neighborhoods. In short, being able to change the dial, change the narrative when it comes to how do we change poor communities around the United States. So I came really prepared in terms of how do you begin to address issues in your community. I was fortunate enough to get the training necessary, to get the tools necessary, combined with having lived in that poor community to make the change that's necessary. So a lot of my training came from the area of community and economic development. My training includes like national organizations, like the community enterprise. The other organization called LIST, or the local initiative support corporations. These two organizations collectively service more nonprofits than any combined group in the United States. So I've gotten training from both of those. On the federal level, I've gotten training from from HUD, from helping community service. Again, all of this training goes back to community and economic development. In terms of the university level, I've gotten trained from the University of South Florida and FAMU. In terms of corporations, that includes the Bank of America. We even got trained from IRS. All this prepared me in terms of changing the narrative on moving the dial when it comes to transforming communities that I come from. Coupled with that was the Small Business Administration. So I come to the table with a lot of background. I'm so blessed to be able to come from the bottom and actually become part of the solution to changing and transforming the neighborhoods that I come from every day, that I see every day, that I believe that there is promise in terms of changing the narrative if we think like new school, next generation. So going back to Sandtown. Sandtown was called an initiative that in Sandtown was called a transformation of the Sandtown neighborhood. It was a public-private relationship, and I'm going to talk more about that when it was a public-private relationship to transforming communities. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But this particular photo that you're looking at, I made a statement during the transformation. They asked me, what did I think transformation is and what does it look like? As you see, Sandtown resident. I can't believe 1990. Anyway, way back then, this was my thinking. I stated that transformation is the homeless family now buying their house. The criminal now teaching the young to go straight. Breaking locks now full with flowers. In a community where residents had no time for each other are now becoming a community where residents hold hands around their community. So this is my thinking and what has led me to where I'm at today. So let's continue on so you can understand I'm deep in this. So now let's go back to the next part of this presentation, talking about partnerships between the public and the private sector. This particular partnership was called, my training was evolved around how to communicate with lenders, with developers, with investors. My training put me in a position to be able to advocate on behalf of the community. So that training prepared me for being able to, when the Sandtown project came along, to be in a position to be the voice in terms of community residents articulating the dream and putting it in a way that lenders understood, investors understood, community understood, government understood, and etc. Community building and partnership. It was one of the first comprehensive and holistic approach to transforming our poor communities. It was a partnership with on the Enterprise Foundation. As you can see, this is Mr. Rouse right here from the Enterprise Foundation. And a partnership with the Baltimore City. As you can see here, this is the mayor. Now, believe it or not, this is me in this picture. This is also me in this picture. Baltimore, Kurt Smoke. Very smart man, Harvard, Yale, a Princeton type of connection. So the idea behind this partnership was that we needed to rethink how we were transforming communities. That we needed to move from a singlistic approach, like health, drugs, crime, and move to a comprehensive approach where we're looking at the solution to the problem as a whole, and also looking at the different parts that make up the whole. This particular picture here, with Mr. Rouse and I in it, was when the PBS came out and that did an interview with me and Mr. Rouse because of the national implication of this new approach. That's PBS, Public Broadcast System. It was so, the idea was so fresh with the public and private sector coming together that it got national attention to the point that you had the PBS to come out and do a story on it. We had people from around the world to come in to see what is this new idea on how you can change all your problems all at once with what we call the comprehensive holistic approach. There were people from around the country and the world that came to Sandtown to see what was this new idea of trying to transform communities all at the same time. This thinking led to the foundation of what was then called the Federal Empowerment Zone. That's how impactful this new school of thought was. And this is where I got my training from. Now, Mr. Rouse appreciated my insight and my ability to learn fast and to actually be able to articulate a position and the perspective from the community. When I say I appreciate the lessons learned and training opportunities during the Sandtown project, it was valuable to me because what happened was in 2008, I actually was brought back as a consultant to work directly with the West Tampa community to design an approach to transformation. And we're talking about that a little bit later. I'm sorry, continue. So that's why he chose me to speak to and share with the nation in terms of what does community empowerment look like. That was a great opportunity. Now, because I understood the process, Mr. Routes or people higher up then asked me to speak to organizations from around the country and around the world that came to Sandtown, that came to Baltimore to see what is this new idea on how to transform community. So we started off with this picture right here in terms of painting the picture of what transformation looks like on a broader picture. That is the concept, the ideas. Then we took them to actually how the plan operates on the bottom level. So this right here was me explaining to folks from around the country how we applied what was learned from the empowerment zone and other initiatives to apply it on a community level. So this picture, you see people from around the country and around the world to hear practicality on how the program worked. When I was speaking to this group, it was all about me being able to talk the broader picture. This picture includes big organizations from around the country, small and big, that came in to learn about the, as a matter of fact, even the feds was there. Because what we learned is that they was interested in using our approach to start a national level, which was called the Federal Empowerment Zone. But it all started here. This opportunity to share the approach with the nation. I was chosen because of my ability to be able to talk in different crowds of people, be it businesses, renters, developers, community people, government, the faith community. I was able to adapt to and speak that language to sell the deal. So you could say I was the sell the deal guy during this particular project, and it offered me an opportunity to really reach the level that I'm at now. I really appreciate the training that I got out of that. The next thing I had to do after the two prior pictures that you saw, and selling the deal to the public, neighborhood groups, government agencies, people from around the country trying to find out about the idea. That was the first part. The second part I had to do was to sell it to the private sector. I had to go before the, I think it's called Baltimore the Baltimore Chamber of Commerce Committee. Greater Baltimore Chamber of Commerce. I had to speak to them to convince them to give money. So Mr. Rouse, as you can see from this memo that came to me, was really impressed and say I sold the deal in order to create an opportunity for people to give more money to it. What I did was explain to them how it related in economic terms. Now, not only did they want me to sell the deal to the organizations, groups from around the country, funders, etc. They also wanted me to sell the deal to the private sector. And this is where I attended a meeting in which I got a response back saying that I killed it. I was able to transition from being able to talk to an audience that is in the private sector to an audience that's in the community setting, or an audience that's a lender or a developer or a lender or an investor or any of those different groups of people My job was to be able to articulate the plan to a broader group of individuals. It all started as a community organizer. This picture shows my passion to want to make a difference. I think this was taken 30 years ago. Yeah, 30 years ago. I don't know, about 30 years ago. And I started as a community organizer. So I started looking at the bigger picture. And my skill set as a community organizer prepared me to how to mobilize and organize groups of people around issues. That talent, like that talent that Barack Obama has placed me in a good position with that skill set to get community buy-in, understanding how to get buy-in from the community. There is a necessity, I think, when you come to community development, that individuals that have that community organizing and mobilizing skill set becomes valuable to the deal. Because if you can't get people inspired to want to act, and that's what a community organizer and mobilizer does. They get people inspired to want to act, want to participate, and want to be a part of something that's bigger than them. Bigger than them. I took all of that training that we talked about earlier, fast forward, and begun to engage communities and educators who represent the next generation of scholars. From the University of South Florida to Baltimore Johns Hopkins, having conversations. This group here was a group of folks from around Florida that came to hear about what was going on in Tampa that reflected a new school of thought of how communities were empowering themselves to change the narrative. This picture here represents when I was asked to speak at the University of South Florida to their grad students. I was so good at speaking to the grad students that they asked me back a second time to speak to grad students. So it's been a good opportunity, I think, from where I come from a person that came from a community of folks that felt powerless to do anything about their conditions, to grow up and be one of those individuals to create empowerment and to create a sense of hopefulness. And as a matter of fact, I think that all the training that I got over the years was supposed to be focused towards taking that skill set back to corporate America. What I did, in fact, is to take everything that I learned from corporate America and brought it back to the streets. So all the training that I've gotten over the years has prepared me to work with communities from the bottom up in terms of empowering them to determine their own vision, their own mission in life. So what I did was I flipped the switch. Instead of going to these big organizations, I actually came back and put that knowledge that I have in the community. And I've been doing that for the last 30, 40 years. So anyway, here it is. Finally, we get to this part of the presentation that talks about what is it that we did in Sandtown, and how we believe that what you're about to see now can be reduplicated in the Sandtown Winchester community today in 2023. So let's go back to talk about what we was trying to do and what we presented to the community. The first thing we share with the community is that there's two approaches to strategic planning. The first approach, and this approach is most common when outside people come in to do a program or project. We talked earlier about programs coming in year after year after year. A need assessment model appears to an imposed standard. That means they come in and they create the standard of operation. It is driven by outside agencies. Listen up, it views residents as programs clients. It continues to outflow of community resources instead of the inflow of community resources. This is what we call a need assessment. It's based on the fact that you need something. The most plausible, feasible, sellable, bankable, sustainable, marketable, fundable, and all of those bulls that you can use to change the narrative is using an assets billing model. Well, an assets billing model focus on existing capacity. It's relationship driven, promotes self-sufficiency, and recycle resources within the community. This is what we call community empowerment. Now, assets mapping is an approach to development. It brings together three disciplines, and that is neighborhood planning. That's how you connect the community and plan for and on behalf of the community. Community organizing. That's how you bring the people together and get buy-in. And economic development. Now, it attempts to mold these three disciplines into a single methodology for community revitalization. And this becomes the basis of the initiative that you're going to be hearing about. Now, assets billing model, let's talk about that. The first principle of an asset building strategy is to begin by identifying what is present in the community. It looks at inside. It looks at resident skills, neighborhood associations, and institutions, instead of what's absent or what's programmatic. Remember, the other thing I want to interject, we talked earlier about a need assessment. That looks at what's absent and what's programmatic. Assets mapping looks at it on the opposite side. Now, the other thing about the two concepts, need assessment versus assess building, is that Need assessment looks at it from the half full glass. That's what an assets building model look at it from the half full glass approach. A need assessment looks at it from the half empty glass. So those concepts are in contrast to each other. One looks at it as a half full glass, full glass, that's assets mapping, and the other looks at it as a half empty glass, and that's need assessment. Now, the primary purpose of assets mapping is to provide the community with an understanding of its potential for revitalization. The key in which is the process of assembling the map skills and capacity into combinations and structures that enhance or multiply their effectiveness. We've actually created a web, interactive website that allows us to map people's skill sets and capacities to potential jobs in and out of the community. As one example of assets mapping. So now we went to the brainstorming section with the community. Keep in mind, we had neighborhood groups and residents and shareholders from around the community to partake in this training. Now, Father Damon, who has since passed with the St. Gregory Church, he was the he allowed us to use the building in order to facilitate the meeting with the community. And again, we have residents that came from out the neighborhood, as well as neighborhood groups that partake into this brainstorming section. We also had the business community that was there. We had faith community that was there. We had potential funders that was listening in on the conversation. So we was able to really begin to paint a different picture as to how do you begin to create a situation where the community is able to be in control. I was happy because I was one of the trainers. I was brought in as a trainer because of my background in the West Tampa and other communities that could be defined as a community that is under stress, that's distressed, poor. That background that I had in working in those communities brought me to be part of the deal related to the Sandtown deal that we're talking about today. But it was my background. You're going to hear a little bit about more about my background and how that background prepared me to create something even better than what I understood back then. So we started off with what is strategic planning. And we shared with them that it's a 5-year plan. It's a future plan of where you at and where you want to be at in 5 years. We talk about the different components, the framework to creating a strategic plan, the vision, the mission, the value statement, the symptoms, that is, what is the problem? The diagnosis, that is, what's the reason for the problem? And then the themes from the diagnosis that we call the gaps. How do we plug it in? What's missing? How do we fix it? That goes in this in terms of gaps. That then led us to the overall strategy, principles, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, action, responsibility, resources, timetable, and budget. All of these became part of what does a strategic plan look like. We also share with them what does power look like. In order to be an empowered community, you have to be able to have different types of capital. So here we talk about community empowerment. It's the ability to use capital as a powerful force to creating and controlling, designing, and implementing its vision. That is the community vision. We believe that the solution to the problem is within the problem itself. That is a bottom-up approach from the street up. When we talk about capital, if you want to be an empowered organization, you have to have people power. You have to have buy-in from the right people that live in the community. Then you have to have social capital. That's networks, partnership, and those other things that connect to other resources that's out there. So let's look at how do we begin to change the narrative in community. How do you change a poor community in terms of its ability to facilitate its change? We call it the power of capital. In other words, we believe that community empowerment is the ability to use capital as a power force to creating and controlling and designing and implementing its own vision. Implementing its own vision. When we talk about power, we're talking about different types of power. One of the most very important power, and the power that you absolutely have to have to start an initiative, is called people power. This is when you get buy-in from the community. That is, when you engage in a community engagement that engages the entire community and buying in to believing that you can actually do the change that you need. So that's people power, mobilizing, organizing. The next part of the equation is what we call social capital. Social capital is what we call partnerships, networking, collaboratives, and things of that nature that makes your organization even stronger. So that includes social capital. Financial capital, of course, is probably one of the most important capital that you need. That is the funding, the ability to raise funds in order to fund your organization, to have financial sustainability. We're going to talk about that in an upcoming example of an organization that did this. And funding also means that you're creating different streams of income. And those income are earned income in addition to grants. So strategic capital means that you understand the next 5 years and you know how that you plan to get there from a strategic perspective. Skill capital is that capital associated with people that have specialized skills in order to get the job done. So you definitely want to make sure you have skill capital. You'd be surprised at the number of people that have skills that will want to donate in the community to make sure that community is where it needs to be at. And then, of course, I can't underestimate political capital. You have to have political capital in order to really seal the deal. Now, in order to have financial capital, you need at the very least to have people capital, social capital, and strategic capital. You can also throw in skill capital in order to create financial capital. So I'm gonna go and say if you got people capital, social capital, and strategic capital, that brings about financial capital. These other capitals like pluses, your skill and your political capital. So we're talking about fighting at the top level from the street levels and taking it to corporate America. The solution to the problem is within the problem itself. So this is what we consider to be a bottom-up approach to building up from the streets. So the other thing we want to talk about is what are the elements of an empowered community? We talked earlier about the capital and types of capital you need to actually be a powerful community. So let's talk about the different pieces that makes an empowered community. First is community design. Community takes part in the designing of the project or program and other activities that affect them. That is, they decide on what it looks like. Community ownership. Community take ownership of the process, which affect their life by having a 50% voting power on the council or on the neighborhood. We call controlling the process. Community driven. Community driven means community experience the process in partnership with other shareholders. We talk about social capital, that's shareholders as well. So what does that do? Community driven means that now you create the unity necessary to get the community buy-in. Community sustainability is another element. Community sustainability is the process to fund the program with independent financing or social entrepreneurship, that you actually create the mechanism to create different types of earned income in conjunction with grants to sustain the process. Unlike most programs that come in, they control the process because they have the funding source. Under community empowerment element, you actually control the process and able to bring together the finances to make the deal work, as opposed to opposite. Then finally, community participation and buy-in. Community participation in the committees. Community participation includes committees, focus groups, and other activities. In other words, you have to work to make the plan work. In order for this process to work and for it to be truly community driven from the bottom up, you have to make sure that you include those that are low income, those with substance abuse problems, those with mental health problems, those with issues related to homelessness, at-risk youth, senior citizens, those with health problems, and the list goes on and on. You need to make sure that you got a conversation that is inclusive and trying to get input from every group in the community in order to make the deal really acceptable. You have to include everybody, not just the people who come to meetings all the time, but more importantly, the silent majority. And those are the ones that have most of the critical issues. To be successful in getting the largest amount of people to partake in this what we call the empowerment process, you have to create a level of energy that people begin to believe that they can actually make a change. It has the most recent example of being able to mobilize people to believe and change, that they can make the difference in making a change, was during the Obama's administration, when his famous phrase was "keep hope alive." I think that was "keep hope alive." Whatever phrase he used, I think it was "keep hope alive." Whatever the phrase was, he was able to rally people. I'm sorry, the phrase was "yes, we can." Keep hope alive, I think that was Jesse Jackson. But nevertheless, it's those phrases that are used to help to inspire people to mobilize and organize and want to take up the challenge to change that community by participation. If you want to create community empowerment, you're going to have to create a phrase that people gravitate around in order to get our community buy-in. The hardest communities to mobilize and organize in is poor communities. That's where my specialty come in understanding how to mobilize and organize and create a sense of hope when it comes to bringing people together. One of my skill sets is community organizing in that respect. Now let's go to the next part of this presentation and share with you some lessons learned from around the country. What we're about to share with you now is the presentation that we gave in Sandtown. And then it's going to lead into best practices on how do we actually begin to change the narrative. And it's going to talk about a community that is typical of most communities, and that is low income, has issue with affordable housing, it's got community health issues, it's got all of those negative indicators. How that community was able to put itself on the playing field by creating its own vision. Make sure you listen to the end. So this is the presentation that we gave before to the Sandtown group as to empowerment. The second part of the presentation that we shared with the community, that is the Residential Action Committee, CDC. Notice also, I can't overemphasize how important it is that you create a community development initiative. But again, that community development initiative should be controlled by 51% of residents that live in that community. So let's move on. I'm kind of long-winded with it, but I think if you stay throughout the process, I think you now have the tools necessary to go back to your community and begin to plant the seeds necessary to have true community empowerment. So we looked at lessons learned and best practices from a number of communities. We looked at Tampa, Baltimore, New School Community Corporation, the Marshall Heights Community Development Corporation, and DC, the New Community Association is inside of New Jersey. This is in New Jersey. And then finally, we'll talk about the Suburban Job Link. What's important about each of these initiatives that each come with a what I think is a stream of being able to put together earn income other than grant. That is, creating revenue-driven strategies that builds financial sustainability in the neighborhood. The possibility. Now we want to talk about what works. What does success look like? The first group that we're going to be talking about is a group located in the West Tampa community of Tampa. A lot of unique things about the people that live in this particular area. They remind me so much of Sandtown. As you know, the community I come from, known as Sandtown, is a community of people that feel that they are empowered. They don't step back or sit down when something happens. They become part of the process, and they drive the process. This is also true of the people in West Tampa. They show me nothing but love, and I got nothing but love for the people that's in West Tampa. I think that what they've done in this community goes to show in terms of what is a bottom-up approach where the community actually controls the process. So in West Tampa, the board of directors consists of 51% residents. So 51% of the residents in West Tampa oversee the West Tampa CDC. The West Tampa CDC is unique in that its approach to rebuilding people is building people. West Tampa focuses on people, place, and things as a strategy to make changes. What was unique and is unique about the West Tampa community that it was a group of people that were in the community, shareholders from different walks of life, educators, community residents, business leaders that came together to form the West Tampa CDC organization. What's unique about the organization is that the two lead key positions in the community is community residents that have lived there for a long time. The chairperson is the Dr. Margaret Fisher, and the vice chair is Joe Robinson. Both of these individuals stay in the fight. And it's a part because of them that I was brought to Tampa to work with that organization to create a similar strategy that was taking place in Baltimore. And then the use of lessons learned from that to create what works in West Tampa. And they gave me that opportunity to put together the plan. But the plan couldn't work if we didn't have movers and shakers like Dr. Fisher, Joe Robinson, and those other folks in West Tampa, especially neighborhood groups that made sure that the process was going to be kept real. My job was simply to put together the plan. So the West Tampa Corporation blueprint. Let's look at the vision. And this was created by those that was in West Tampa. I just tweaked it, but it still remains the same. The community created it. In terms of vision, it was to create a strong and healthy community where change starts from within. I can't overemphasize to create a strong and healthy community where change starts from within. I think that's the piece I had. Yeah, that sounds like me. But anyway, we wanted to articulate a plan that came from within. That was the vision, that the community was able to create a strong and healthy community, to create a strong and healthy community. The mission, and this was something that was put together by the folks in West Tampa, was to be a catalyst for social, economic, commercial development, housing, and physical development in West Tampa. I added this piece. The methodology used for this initiative it was going to be a community mapping asset building strategy that synthesizes 3 community disciplines: neighborhood planning, community organizing, and economic development into a single methodology for community revitalization. The vehicle that we use for this, we call it the action plan, the strategic action plan. So let's look at the blueprint. What did we learn from the Baltimore story? What did we learn from the empowerment zone? What did we learn from the public relationship with the partnership between private and public that brought about community building and partnership? What did we learn? One of the most important things that we learned from this was that unless that group had a financial arm in which it controls, in which it can attract it, and which is pumping in the finance necessary to keep it afloat, then it doesn't control the process. And added on to that, it's a process where that is the creation of community generational wealth, where the community owns assets that it uses in order to finance its operation. We're going to share more about that formula used to make sure that unlike most initiatives, that this initiative has created its own mechanism of bringing in funding and is independent of outsiders coming in to do fundraising for it. So this operation using a sustainable financial approach. We're going to talk about that approach a little bit later on. But let's get back now to what does the blueprint look like? Well, it starts with the community. Unlike most programs, when you look at that chart as to how does things operate, who's in charge, the community is normally on the second layer, on this layer right here. With this approach, and it believes in a community bottom-up approach. It is the community that pretty much decided what was their vision of the future. What was their vision of creating an inclusive community where residents, no matter what the economic condition, are given a hand up. A community where it positions itself to create the blueprint for success. That then created the West Tampa CDC as the vehicle for the community to fulfill its vision. In other words, the West Tampa CDC is the vehicle to which the community has come together to plot their future and to formulate a CDC, the West Tampa CDC, to carry out and bring that vision to fruition of what it wanted the community to look like. The West Tampa CDC role then that came out of the community was to curate partnerships that brought in resources, partners, and fundings. And some of the different partners that the CDC was charged with, partnering with, was the public sector or government and government, nonprofit sector, the private sector, specifically related to lenders, developers, investors, and all of those financial vehicles that one can use to increase the financing of the vision. And then there's institutions of higher learning and partnership with institutions of higher learning and education in general. So this is part of the overall strategy. It doesn't not exclude any other component, but this is the larger picture. From that, then we looked at what do we strategically make of this partnership. And from a strategic perspective, we implemented what we call a community comprehensive whole holistic approach. What does that mean? That means, how do you look at the community as a whole? Instead of looking at a singlistic approach, how do you look at it as a whole to begin to develop the transformation of that neighborhood? The three key legs of that strategy is economic development, social development, and physical development. Economic development has anything that has to do with money and goods and services. Anywhere from unemployment to unemployment to workforce to all those things in between. That's what we mean by economic development. One of the things that we do related to economic development is to build generational community wealth as part of this narrative. Then we look at social development. And of course, social development is anything that has to do with people. Health, homelessness, youth, crime, family, anything that has to do with people comes under social development. And I'm only named some of the things related to social development. And then finally, the last piece is the land, physical development. What does it look like? Affordable housing, open space, etc. Looking at physical development related to that neighborhood. These are the three key legs to curating what we call a comprehensive, holistic approach. This approach was born out of the Baltimore approach, from the lessons learned from both the Federal Empowerment Zone and all those other programs that came from there. What's critical about this particular plan is that it is an integrated plan, in that economic connects to social, social connects to physical, vice versa. Physical connects to social, which connect to economic. Social connected to social connects to physical, that connects to economic. It's like an ongoing cycle in which all of these systems that we call coalition comprehensive is also an integratable approach in which economics is connected to social, which is connected to physical as well. Including those lessons learned from the Obama administration, the program that he spearheaded, the Clinton administration, and the program that they spearheaded, all combined together to create and what you're looking at now, and what we call the next generation approach to community transformation. The thing that shook the nation was at first that the community decided to develop its own plan. That's how I was brought in. I was brought in as a consultant. And a consultant, they wanted someone to design their own plan. And then they wanted to bring in all of the shareholders. After we developed the plan with the community, the next part of the strategy was to present the plan to the other shareholders. The whole idea was that we had to create the plan, and then we will create it. We had to create the plan, and then by creating the plan, we create the table in which we invited the different shareholders, as well as giving the shareholders their part in the master plan. When we presented this, it got national attention. People was trying to figure out, how does a community have its own strategic planning, and then invite the rest of the shareholders in order to share with them what that entity saw as their role in the process, including bringing together government, national leaders, state leaders, officials from around the country. It was impressive. And we do have a video of that presentation. And what that video is going to show that we brought in the private sector and the public sector, and we brought in the press. And this was what we call the work that was put in and mobilizing and organizing. We was able to show what we could do as a community to change the narrative. And when we presented the plan to the broader community, we was able to dictate everybody's role, what the university needs to do, what government needs to do, what the private sector needs to do. During that night, we was able to show all of the partners that we brought together from both the private and the public sector in order to create the plan. This created a sense of plan for the community. We call community empowerment. What we did was to identify the role of everybody. We look at, well, what can the institution of higher learning play in this strategy? What can the different levels of government from state, local, and national do? What can lenders do? What can investors do? We was able to identify in the plan the role that every shareholder can play in creating the vision for for the West Tampa community. It was the first time that it was an in-house plan that was developed in order to create the table, as they say. He who creates the table and sets at the top of the table control. That was the same concept. We had to create the table or the plan, set at the top of the table, and bring the other people in to set in the seats in order to make sure the deal worked. To actually dictate, this is what institutions of higher learning can do. This is what local federal government can do. This is what lenders can do, etc. Fast forward, the West Tampa CDC has been really successful in putting together its public relationship to bring about really changes in the neighborhood. Because if you're going to play at that level of the community development level, you have to be able to do some really good deals to bring back the bacon, as they say. Two of the things that West Tampa did during this cycle here, related to public-private relationship, it built a relationship. First, it built a relationship with the mayor. The mayor was really impressed with what was going on in West Tampa. As a result of this meeting, we've begun to have monthly meetings with the mayor. The mayor was so impressed with our ability to really transform West Tampa that she made it a policy that any developer that's doing large-scale things should come to the West Tampa CDC to talk about how can you finesse a deal where that doesn't, how can you finesse a deal where your impact reduce the potential for gentrification? That was so key. This was a unique opportunity to show that when you invest in a community development corporation like the CDC, that the dollar stays in the community and it recirculates through the community as opposed to a dollar coming in and leaving the community. That was a key talking point when we talk to residents as well as investors to show that the monies that come into the West Tampa through whatever venture that we decide to employ stays in the community and recycles in the community. Component, and our key component, how do you create a deal where development is done in a smart ways that reduces gentrification? Two of the projects that came out of this was, the first was a deal and was a developer that was going to do a lot of high-end houses in the lower part of West Tampa, lower end of West Tampa, came and sat at the table and wanted to work a deal with the community. I can only say those folks that was part of that negotiation, that includes some key executive members from the Sandtown Winchester, some key executive members from the West Tampa CDC, they finessed a really good deal. I was happy to be part of those negotiations. So one of the deals that came out of that was a grant that will be given directly to the West Tampa CDC for $640,000. That was a lot of money back then in 2005. And the deal, and I think it was that, well, we can reduce the impact of gentrification because now we can provide people that live in West Tampa with closing money. So they could be able to layer the amount of money that they can bring to the table to make the deal work for them to be able to pay the mortgage. See, our whole approach to community revitalization is the reduction of gentrification. We reduce gentrification by creating activities that increases the opportunities for residents to stay in the community. Anywhere from helping them with closing costs to getting them a job, etc. It reduces the level of gentrification. So the key towards our approach is doing smart planning by reducing the gentrification. To the extent possible, every development deal that comes, make sure we finesse a deal that we can reduce the level of gentrification by using a particular program. That was key. In addition to the city down payment, now this is a different type of down payment that they could use. Again, that was to be used to reduce the gentrification. The other piece that was done by another developer was to donate a building to the community that would house the Community Employment Center. The idea being that you're reducing gentrification because now we got a building that we can hire community folks. Keep in mind, West Tampa community is a community that has a lot of people that live below the poverty level. So what this did was to create an opportunity to provide job opportunity within the community where people could get those skill sets to get a job. And not only that, to get a job that could help them stay in and afford to live in the community as well. Those are two examples of how the West Tampa CDC was able to finesse a deal with developers. Now keep in mind, none of those deals manifest itself to the level that it was. Because if we recall, the bubble bust, and when that bubble bust, we had to draw down what was the expectation from each of those partners. Fast forward, 2023. It's another example of a public-private deal. In this deal, it's called the related, we call it the related deal. Actually, it's called the Rome Yard deal. It's a deal between the on the West Tampa CDC side of the table. The West Tampa CDC was brought in on what was to become the Rome Yard deal. Our position was to serve on the actual planning committee that was putting together the deal for the Rome Yard project. That means we had a front seat with those different partners that was putting together the Rome Yard deal. That was important because it gave us an opportunity to put together what we thought would be something that reduced gentrification. That's something that we talked about, was putting together what we call the Technology, Wealth Building, and Job Creation Center. What's important about each of these components that we talked about is that in order to move the dial in poor communities, each of these components are essential. The first, technology. Technology like artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and so many other technologies like doing game coding, game application, mobile application, and then this goes on and on. Virtual reality, technology is changing the narrative. Our approach is using technology in a way to transform Black poor community residents economically using technology like artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. The other part of that, we talked about the technology. Again, it's a three-part approach: technology, wealth building, and job creation. We talked about the technology part in part, but there's so many other pieces to that technology part. The second part is the wealth building part. It builds on the idea of how can we create individual generational wealth as well as community generational wealth. In terms of creating generational wealth related to the individual, the wealth building initiative focus on giving business opportunities. With this first program that's being rolled out, it's called the Home-Based/E-Commerce Initiative. There are literally hundreds of jobs that can be created using a home-based e-commerce approach. And it's very little or nothing to start that particular type of business. What we're looking at is creating that type of home-based e-commerce business where we provide those folks who have no generational wealth the seed money to create their own business, creating generational wealth. The other part of that scenario is creating an opportunity. Let me back up for 1 second. The home/e-commerce industry is taking off like a superstar. So the other part of that wealth building strategy is to teach or move folks in poor communities from being a consumer to being an investor. It's a belief that we need to change the narrative on how we spend that $1.6 trillion a year as a group, as a black people, how do we finesse the deal with flip the switch and become investors? And this is what the second part teaches. How to be an investor, how to make money. And we're talking about at least 20, 30 different ways to create that. Plus combined with creating passive income. That's what that segment looked like. That leads to a job creation. Now, why is this important? This is shows what happens when you do a partnership with public-private partnership, in which the group that's acting on behalf of the community is sitting at the decision-making table when the project is being developed. I hope this presentation has provided you with some insights related to what can residents and poor communities do to change the narrative where they find themselves in control of determining what their community look like. If you want to learn about more projects related to economic development, please feel free to email me. The particular system down the bottom that gives you my email, Center for Nonprofit and Community at gmail.com. Center for Nonprofit and Community at gmail.com. The takeaways from this video tonight, and I hope that definitely folks in Sandtown, Winchester, the community that I grew up in, that you understand that there is opportunity to change the narrative when it comes to you moving forward. And I'd like to have some offline discussions about the next steps in Sandtown to create really a process in which the residents control it. The process in which becoming actually a CDC, a Sandtown Community Development Corporation, and how that looks, and how that then can change the narrative, and how you can then determine how money is brought into the community. And when you control the money that is brought into the community, you control the process. The problem with projects passed in Sandtown with other communities is that outside came in with the resources and the money. And when they left, they took the resources and the money. This conversation that we had tonight shows that Sandtown can change the narrative and turn it around. That's a lot of possibility in Sandtown. Sometimes people look at Sandtown by way of the half full glass, that is the need assessment. I looked at Sandtown by way of the half full glass, that is assets mapping. That's why I know the potential for change in Sandtown is feasible. It's definitely feasible. So I put this together pretty much, as it said, to show light where there's darkness. But I'm definitely going to be having some offline conversations with the leaders in Sandtown, talking about what do we do in terms of bringing it back to a reality. The thing I do know, that the power to control Sandtown is within the residents themselves, and mobilizing, organizing, and keeping, and then creating a power book organization. So thank you for listening to this presentation tonight. But the presentation also relates to any community in the United States where there is a high amount of poverty in that community and how the community can rise up and change that narrative. I want to leave you with one phrase: poor people are big business. And let's poor people turn it around and they become the business. Again, poor people are big business. Everybody make money on it unless you turn it around and you become big business. That's what we call controlling the narrative, creating the table and inviting the guests in to help build the building.